Snow lashed sideways across the highway as the semi-truck skidded into the guardrail metal, screaming against metal. And there, alone in the glare of failing headlights, stood a man in a torn work jacket, one arm bleeding, the other dragging a stranger out of a crushed car before the fuel line caught fire. Sirens were still miles away. Wind roared like an angry beast. The flames snapped closer, brighter, hungry. He braced his boots in the slush, lifted the unconscious driver onto his shoulder, and stumbled just as the wreck behind him exploded in a bloom of fire that lit the night like judgment. He didn't look back. He just kept moving, teeth clenched, breath visible in sharp bursts of white. Because someone's life still depended on him, and moments were slipping away. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Hours before that inferno on Route 47, Cole Harrington was just a 38-year-old maintenance supervisor doing his best to keep a small-town Michigan high school from falling apart. His days were full of leaking pipes, flickering lights, and students who treated him like part of the background, polite enough, but rarely seeing the man behind the uniform. Cole didn't mind the hard work. It kept his hands busy, and busy hands kept the memories quieter. He'd lost his wife 3 winters ago, a loss that carved him open in ways he still didn't talk about. Most nights he ate dinner with his 12-year-old son, Tyler, in their small rental home, pretending the empty chair at the table didn't ache. What people didn't know was that Cole had once been a certified rescue technician, trained to navigate collapsed structures and burning vehicles. But after losing his wife, he walked away from that world, choosing quieter routines that wouldn't demand so much of his heart. He fixed boilers instead of broken ribs. He swept hallways instead of disaster zones. And he tried quietly to rebuild something like a life for Tyler, who'd inherited his father's gentle eyes and his mother's stubborn hope. Cole's routine was simple and steady. Morning coffee in a steel thermos. Tyler's backpack check before school. A rundown truck that coughed to life only when spoken to kindly. And a job where he kept 1,000 small problems from becoming big ones. He valued dignity, responsibility, and showing up even on the days that hurt. But that Friday evening, as holiday break approached and snow began falling hard and fast, the principal asked him if he could run one last errand, a delivery of donated equipment to a community center 40 miles away. Cole didn't hesitate. He loaded the crates, texted Tyler he'd be home by 8, and set out on the dim, icy highway. He didn't know that a jackknifed semi up ahead would send him skidding toward a nightmare. He didn't know fate was about to demand the skills he'd buried for years. And he didn't know that pulling a stranger from a burning car would uncover a secret that would turn his quiet life and his son's future upside down. Snow still fell in slow, heavy sheets, the morning after the accident settling over the town like a wool blanket. Cole woke sore, every muscle protesting the way he'd wrenched open twisted metal and carried a full-grown man across an icy ditch. He'd gone straight home after giving his statement, slipping quietly into the kitchen where Tyler had fallen asleep at the table waiting for him. Cole hadn't woken him. He'd just carried his boy to bed, tucked him in, and stood there longer than necessary watching the soft rise and fall of his breathing. By sunrise, Cole was already back at the high school boots, squeaking against melted snow as he pushed open the maintenance door. Being dependable meant showing up even when fatigue gnawed at the edges of his vision. The principal, Mr. Dayton, intercepted him before he could hang his coat. "You're late," Dayton said, tapping his watch, though Cole was exactly on time. And the west stairwell light was out this morning. Students almost tripped. You're supposed to check those things before you leave. Cole opened his mouth to explain he had left early because of the winter delivery, and then the accident. But Dayton was already walking away, shaking his head, in that disappointed, paternal way he reserved for people he considered beneath him. Cole let the words go. He always did. He'd learned years ago that arguing with people who never listened only emptied you faster. He headed to the west stairwell, toolbox in hand, and climbed the steps while students streamed past, all chatter and slamming lockers. A few nodded politely. Most didn't see him at all. Halfway through replacing the fixture, a voice snapped across the hallway. "Hey, you maintenance guy." Cole turned, blinking under the bright flashlight beam aimed directly into his eyes. A man in a tailored overcoat approached with brisk steps and briefer patience. He had an expensive haircut, an expensive watch, and the kind of expression that suggested everything beneath him was an inconvenience. "I was looking for the district liaison," the man said. "Someone told me to find you, but that can't be right. I need an actual supervisor, or someone who understands how budgets work." Cole gently lowered the light fixture he'd been installing. "Sir, I'm the maintenance supervisor. If you tell me what you need..." The man scoffed. "Supervisor. Right." His gaze skimmed Cole's worn work jacket, the faded patch on the sleeve, the calloused hands. "Look, I don't have time for this. I'm here to evaluate which buildings get funding upgrades next year. Someone else will have to explain things to you later in simpler terms." A teacher walking by gave Cole a small, pitying smile before hurrying along. Cole waited until the man disappeared around the corner before exhaling slowly. It wasn't anger, exactly. Just that familiar weight behind the ribs, the weight that came from being misjudged again and again, no matter how hard he worked or how much he gave. He finished the light. Then he finished everything else on his list. That was how he survived most days, one task at a time, one quiet breath at a time. At lunch, he sat with Tyler in the cafeteria. His son had brought his tray to the maintenance table instead of eating with his friends, something he'd started doing more often when he sensed his dad was tired. "You okay today?" Tyler asked, poking at his mashed potatoes. Cole nodded. "Just sore. Nothing to worry about. You got home really late last night." "Yeah," Cole said. "Work took longer than I expected." Tyler didn't push, but his eyes, those familiar, earnest eyes, searched Cole's face with too much understanding for a 12-year-old. Cole hated that part. Hated that his hardships had made his kid wary, always watching for the slightest crack in his dad's armor. "I'll be fine," Cole added, nudging Tyler's shoulder gently. "Promise." After school, Cole received a call from the district office ordering him to attend an emergency facilities review meeting. The same evaluator from earlier, the man in the expensive coat, sat at the head of the long conference table. "We're here to discuss safety deficiencies," he announced. "Some departments are chronically underperforming and decisions must be made." Cole felt several pairs of eyes turn his way. The evaluator clicked through a slideshow of photos, a chipped stair railing, an aging boiler, a broken locker door. Most of these issues were already on Cole's repair queue, scheduled and budgeted. But the man didn't mention timelines. He didn't mention funding delays. He didn't mention that Cole's department was understaffed by 3 positions the district refused to refill. Instead, he leaned back and said, "These images reflect neglect. They signal poor supervision, and they put students at risk." Cole clasped his hands in front of him. "Sir, every item you're showing is already documented and scheduled for repair. Some of them require parts that I'm aware of your excuses," the man interrupted. "But the fact remains we need someone capable of preventing these issues before they reach this point. Someone more proactive, more qualified." A few administrators shifted uncomfortably. One cleared her throat as if wanting to defend Cole, but no words came. Given these findings, the evaluator continued, I'll be recommending the district consider structural changes within your department, possibly replacing leadership. Cole felt the hit like a quiet punch. Not dramatic, not loud, but deep. He'd spent years keeping this building running with duct tape budgets and a prayer, and still it was never enough. Not for people who never saw the midnight floods he'd cleaned, or the mornings he'd shown up alone to shovel the entire courtyard so the school could open. After the meeting, Cole stepped outside into the freezing air. His breath fogged instantly. Snowflakes melted on his cheeks, warm with frustration he never let anyone see. He needed a moment, a breath, a reset. But the universe didn't wait. Before he could walk to his truck, he saw Tyler standing on the sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder, wiping his nose on his sleeve. His eyes were red. "What happened?" Cole asked immediately. Tyler hesitated. "Dad, some kids were talking in the hallway. About you. What did they say? That the school might fire you. That you're the reason the building's falling apart." He looked down. "They said other stuff too. Stuff I didn't want to repeat." Cole's heart twisted. Tyler had already lost a mother. The kid's world was fragile enough without rumors about losing his dad's job. "Look at me," Cole said gently. Tyler lifted his eyes. "None of that is your fault, and it's not even the full truth. People talk when they don't know the facts." "But will we be okay?" Tyler asked, voice small. That question, more than the evaluator's threat, cut straight through Cole's chest. Tyler had learned the shape of uncertainty too young. He shouldn't have to wonder if they'd lose their home again, or if his dad would come back defeated. Cole forced a steady smile. "We'll always find a way. You hear me?" Tyler nodded, but the worry didn't fade. That night, as Cole reheated leftover stew and Tyler worked on homework at the table, the weight of the day pressed harder than usual. Not because of the meeting or the evaluator's smirk, but because his son had carried fear home like it was wedged inside his backpack. Later, after Tyler went to bed, Cole sat alone on the couch, staring at the wall. His hands still smelled faintly of diesel from the morning repairs. His body ached from yesterday's rescue, and his mind churned with the same question on repeat. How much more could he take? He didn't want thanks for the rescue. He didn't want praise. He didn't even want recognition. He just wanted fairness, a chance to work with dignity, a chance to provide stability for his kid without always standing on cracked ground. But life had a way of testing men slowly, then suddenly. 2 days later, the evaluator returned to walk the building again, this time accompanied by the superintendent. They trailed Cole through the boiler room, making clipped comments and notes about inefficiencies and concerning delays. At one point, the evaluator tapped a rusted valve with his polished shoe. Why wasn't this replaced years ago? Cole kept his voice level. It's a discontinued part. We've submitted replacement requests 3 times. The district hasn't approved the expenditure. The superintendent frowned. Is that accurate? Yes, Cole said. I can show the paperwork. But the evaluator waved a hand. That won't be necessary. It's clear this department has grown too dependent on excuses. Sometimes leadership becomes complacent. Cole felt his jaw tighten. I'm not complacent. You're certainly not proactive, the evaluator replied. A man in your position should anticipate issues before they arise. Something in Cole finally flickered. With all due respect, sir, anticipating is easy when you control the budget. Fixing things without one is a little harder. The superintendent glanced between them, sensing tension rising like steam off the boiler. The evaluator stepped closer. Your attitude is noted, and it confirms what I've suspected all week. Before Cole could ask what he meant, the evaluator snapped a photo of the old valve and turned to the superintendent. This goes into my final report. Immediate action recommended. Cole felt the moment settle like a storm cloud. This wasn't a review. This was a setup. Someone had already decided his fate, and everything since then had been the ceremony of making it official. When the evaluator and superintendent left the room, Cole stood frozen in the quiet hum of machinery. The air smelled of dust and old metal, familiar scents that had been the backdrop of his work for years. But for the first time, they felt like the air of a shrinking world. He pressed his hands against the workbench, closing his eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a strain he'd kept hidden for too long pulled tighter. He wasn't at the breaking point yet, but he could see it from where he stood. The first hard snap of crisis came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 hours before dismissal, when winter sun stretched thin over the high school courtyard, and the cold had a metallic bite to it. Cole was in the workshop cleaning tools when the PA system crackled to life with a static-laced announcement that didn't sound like any he'd heard before. Attention staff. Please remain calm. We have a developing situation in the science wing. All teachers keep students in classrooms until further instruction. Then the line cut abruptly. Cole froze with a wrench in hand. He'd heard enough emergency calls in his rescue tech days to recognize the tone behind the words, the forced calm, the clipped edge. Something was very wrong. Before he could grab his radio, a thunderous boom shook the building. The floor trembled under his boots. Dust drifted from an overhead vent. Cole dropped the wrench and ran. Students were already peeking into the halls, some crying, some grabbing phones. Teachers shouted for them to stay inside. A haze of smoke began to spread from the far end of the corridor, carrying an acrid chemical smell that stung Cole's eyes. He sprinted past the main office where the evaluator, the same man who'd spent the week tearing into Cole, stood with the superintendent. Both looked pale, both frozen, neither moving to help. What happened? Cole demanded. The evaluator swallowed hard. There was some kind of explosion in the chemistry lab, a gas line or a gas line that was supposed to be replaced last year, the superintendent added quietly, guilt twisting her voice. Cole didn't waste time arguing. Anyone inside, we don't know, the superintendent said. But Cole already knew. The science wing housed lab classes until the last bell. If even one student was trapped. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Smoke rolled thicker now, seeping under classroom doors. Fire alarms screamed overhead. Students huddled inside rooms, their silhouettes trembling behind glass windows. Cole's mind shifted into a mode he hadn't touched in years. Not since he'd walked away from rescue work. Not since the night he'd held his wife's hand, promising he'd never again step into danger that might steal Tyler's last parent. But now danger wasn't a choice. It was already here. And children were inside. Cole grabbed an extinguisher from the wall, wrapped his sleeve over his mouth, and bolted into the smoky wing. Cole, the superintendent, called after him. "Wait for firefighters." He didn't look back. Firefighters were 8 minutes away if traffic cooperated. 8 minutes was an eternity when flames were fed by chemicals and gas. He pushed into the corridor. Heat rolled against him in waves. Ceiling tiles had collapsed near the lab entrance. Glass crunched under his boots. A locker door hung twisted, blown outward by the blast. His heart hammered, but his breaths came steady, controlled. Old training clicking into place like gears, low visibility. Listen first. He paused. A faint coughing came from the broken lab door. Then a small voice. "Help! Please!" Cole moved. The doorway was blocked by a half-fallen cabinet and burning debris. Flames licked the walls. Through the smoke, he could make out 2 figures huddled under a desk. One moving, one frighteningly still. A boy and a girl, maybe 16. "Hang on," Cole shouted, voice muffled by his sleeve. "I'm coming." He swung the extinguisher, smashing debris aside. Heat seared his exposed skin. A beam fell from above, grazing his shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. He didn't stop. He shoved the cabinet aside with a grunt, clearing enough space to crawl inside. Flames snapped at his heels. The smoke was thick enough to choke. The girl coughed violently, trying to pull the unconscious boy closer. "Can you move?" Cole asked. "My ankle," she wheezed. "I can't stand." A burst of fire erupted near the chemical counter, splashing orange light across their faces. The unconscious boy wasn't breathing normally. Lab fumes could kill fast. Cole lifted him first, dragging him toward the doorway. Every muscle in his back screamed. A beam cracked overhead, sending sparks raining around them. "Get him out! Get him out now!" He pulled the boy across the floor, using his body as a shield from falling debris. Once in the hall, he propped the boy against the wall and checked his airway. Still breathing, but shallow. Cole turned back into the lab. The girl was trying to crawl, but her leg buckled uselessly. Flames had reached the gas line, now roaring louder. He slid an arm under her shoulders. "Wrap your arms around me. I can't." "You can. Now." She obeyed. He lifted her, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and fought through the thickening smoke. His vision blurred. His lungs burned. Halfway across the room, a blast of heat flashed behind them as the remaining gas pockets ignited. The force knocked Cole forward, sending him to his knees. He tightened his grip on the girl, shielding her as debris clattered around them. He forced himself up. One step. Another. The hallway appeared like a tunnel of gray light. He cleared the doorway just as a second explosion ripped the back wall open, sending a shockwave that slammed the lab door shut behind them. Students down the hall screamed. The superintendent and 2 teachers rushed forward, helping Cole lower the girl to the ground. The evaluator stood frozen, stunned silent. His earlier arrogance melted into pale disbelief. "Call the med team," Cole rasped, "and get fresh air into this hall." The superintendent nodded, shaking. But Cole wasn't done. Where was Tyler? He scanned the hall. Students were being escorted into safe rooms, some crying, some coughing. A teacher shouted into a phone for paramedics. Then, near the stairwell, he saw a familiar hoodie. Tyler stood, rigid eyes wide, staring at his father, who had just stumbled from fire and smoke, like a man carved out of 2 worlds. Cole hurried over. "Ty, are you okay?" Tyler nodded, but his chin quivered. "Dad, you went in there. I had to. What if something happened to you?" Cole knelt, gripping his son's shoulders. "I'm right here. And those kids needed help." Tyler pressed his face into Cole's jacket, clutching him with both arms. Cole held him close, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the reality settle. His son had seen everything. The fear, the smoke, the moment Cole could have died. But he'd also seen something else. He'd seen who his father truly was. When Cole rose again, the evaluator approached slowly, as if approaching a man he suddenly understood wasn't small at all. You shouldn't have gone in." The evaluator stammered. "It wasn't safe." "Liability." Cole stared at him, soot streaked across his face. "You're right. It wasn't safe." The evaluator swallowed. There were 2 students inside, alive," Cole said. "Because I didn't wait." Teachers nearby glanced between them, murmuring. For the first time, several of them looked at Cole, not as a background worker, but as someone whose calm had saved lives. A fire truck wailed in the distance, growing louder. Snowflakes drifted into the open doorway, melting on the burned corridor floor. The superintendent stepped closer, voice trembling. "Cole, thank you. You saved them. No one else could have. Anyone could have," he said. But they knew it wasn't true. Not anyone. Not everyone runs toward fire. Not everyone knows how to navigate a failing structure, carry 2 injured teenagers, and keep panic at bay. Not everyone puts their life on the line without hesitation. The firefighters arrived, taking over the scene, but the shift in the building had already happened. Students whispered. Teachers watched with new eyes. And the evaluator, once so sure of Cole's inadequacy, now seemed very small in the smoky hallway. Cole stood silently beside Tyler, one arm around his son's shoulders, as the chaos settled into order around them. Something had changed. Not in the building, not in the burned-out lab, in how people saw him, and in the balance of power that had been tilting against him for weeks. The moment had finally cracked it open. And the truth waiting to come out next would change everything. Smoke clung to the halls long after the fire crews cleared the science wing, drifting in pale ribbons through the dim light of late afternoon. Students were shepherded outside to waiting buses, shivering under silver emergency blankets. Teachers spoke in hushed voices, still rattled. And everywhere Cole walked, people's eyes followed, some wide with shock, some with gratitude, some with the dawning realization that the man they'd overlooked for years had just done something extraordinary. The superintendent hovered a few steps behind him, phone clutched in her hand, glancing at him as though she wasn't sure whether to thank him again or simply study him. A paramedic insisted on checking Cole's vitals, brushing ash off his jacket as she wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm. "You inhaled a fair bit of smoke," she said. "Should get an X-ray. Could also be a cracked rib with how you're holding your side." Cole nodded, though his thoughts stayed elsewhere on the 2 students now loaded into ambulances, both alive. On Tyler, who refused to leave his father's side. And on the evaluator who lingered off to the right, like a man watching his world view unravel in real time. "Dad," Tyler whispered, tugging Cole's sleeve. "The news crews are here." Cole looked up to see cameras, arriving reporters pushing microphones toward shaken faculty. Sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the scrape of boots and murmurs of disbelief. The evaluator approached at last, clearing his throat like someone preparing to apologize, but not entirely sure how. "Mr. Harrington, well, that was highly unorthodox," he started, voice wavering. "Risky. Dangerous." Cole met his eyes. Kids were trapped. Yes, well, even so. The evaluator swallowed hard. Most people would not have had the training or the presence of mind to handle that. The superintendent stepped in, speaking before Cole could answer. "He didn't just handle it, he saved lives. 2 of our students are breathing right now because of him." Teachers nearby murmured agreement, some nodding, some wiping tears. The evaluator looked down, chastened. "Mr. Harrington," he said slowly, "your file, your employment history. It lists maintenance and safety certifications, but nothing—" He gestured vaguely toward the ruined wing. "Nothing like what we just saw." "I didn't list it," Cole said simply. Why not? Because listing it meant opening a door he'd closed years ago. Because it meant explaining why he left search and rescue behind. Because it meant talking about the one night he'd failed to save the person he loved most. A night he never spoke about. Cole didn't answer, and for a long moment the only sound was the distant clatter of firefighters rolling up hoses. The superintendent placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Cole, people talk. And after today, they'll talk even more." If there's something we should know, something that might help us understand how you stayed calm in a situation most trained responders freeze in, you can tell us. You're not in trouble." Tyler looked up at him, worry tugging his expression into something smaller, tighter. "Dad," he whispered, "is this about Mom?" Cole felt his heart stutter. He'd never intended for his son's voice to carry that pain into the open. Never intended for this part of his life to bleed into the halls where Tyler felt safe. But the truth had a way of rising when smoke cleared. He took a breath, slow and deliberate, letting the cold air settle inside his lungs. "I used to be a rescue technician," he said finally. "Rapid response, structural collapses, vehicle extractions, that kind of work." A ripple went through the crowd. Even the evaluator's expression softened into something close to remorse. The superintendent blinked. "You were for 11 years. Cole rubbed the scar on his forearm, a habit he picked up in the years after the accident. "Then one night I arrived too late. A collapsed home, too much fire, too many minutes lost in traffic. We pulled 3 people out, but..." His throat tightened. Tyler pressed closer, his small hand anchoring Cole back to the present. "My wife was one of the trapped," Cole said quietly. "And she didn't make it." A hush fell over everyone. The superintendent's voice broke. "Cole, I didn't know. Wasn't something I wanted to put in a resume." He exhaled. "After that, I couldn't keep doing the job. Couldn't face the idea of Tyler losing both parents. So I found work that still mattered, but wasn't supposed to put me in those situations." The evaluator closed his eyes, shame settling across his features like a weight. "I misjudged you," he said, voice cracking. "Deeply. And publicly." Cole didn't respond. He wasn't ready to let anger in. He wasn't ready to let forgiveness in either. One of the reporters approached the perimeter, raising a microphone. Sir, are you the man who went into the burning lab? Could we get your name?" "Your statement." The superintendent stepped between them. "No comments right now. This is a school emergency, not a media circus." But the evaluator surprised everyone by stepping forward next. "This man," he said, pointing to Cole, "is the reason no one died today. You want a statement? That's the one you get." The reporters exchanged glances, scribbling notes, lens shutters clicking. Cole felt heat rise to his face, not the heat of fire, but the heat of being seen in a way he hadn't asked for. Dad, Tyler whispered, tugging gently at his sleeve. "You didn't tell me you used to save people." Cole looked down at his son, at the curiosity mixed with fear and pride. "I stepped away from that life when you were little," he said softly. "But I never forgot what I learned." Tyler nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm glad you remembered it today." Another paramedic approached with a clipboard. "Sir, we really should get you to urgent care. That cough is concerning, and your shoulder looks..." "Later," Cole said. "I'm fine for now." But the superintendent shook her head. "No, you're not fine. You inhaled smoke, you carried 2 teenagers out of a fire, and you nearly got crushed by falling beams. You're going to the clinic. That's not a request." Cole managed a tired nod. The evaluator stepped closer, awkward and earnest. "Mr. Harrington Cole, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a correction. The report I was preparing, it's wrong, and I'll be rewriting it from the ground up." The superintendent added, "And once you're cleared medically, I'd like you to meet with the district board. Your experience, your background, these are things that could reshape our entire safety program." Cole blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this school and this district has needed someone like you for a long time. Someone who understands prevention and crisis response. Someone who knows what real safety requires. The evaluator nodded. A director-level position. Policy oversight. Training integration. You'd lead the new district safety and emergency preparedness division if you want it. Tyler's head snapped toward his father, eyes wide. Cole didn't answer. Couldn't. His mind reeled with the weight of the offer, the sudden pivot from being threatened with replacement to being invited into leadership. The superintendent softened her tone. It's not a decision you have to make today, but it's on the table, and it's yours to choose. For the first time in a long time, Cole felt a doorway open instead of close. He watched the firefighters haul equipment out of the ruined lab. He watched teachers comfort trembling students. He watched Tyler, who looked at him as if seeing a man made of equal parts steel and mistakes and quiet love. The wind carried the faint scent of ash, but beneath it was the sharp, clean smell of falling snow. A new beginning, a new responsibility, a new chance to step into a version of himself he'd locked away long ago. Cole tightened his arm around Tyler's shoulders and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, he would decide. But tonight, standing in the ruins, he'd turned into survival. He knew one thing for certain. The truth had changed everything. And once truth starts moving, it doesn't stop. The hospital let Cole go home just after midnight. His shoulder-wrapped lungs cleared and instructions in hand to take it easy for a few days. But rest wasn't what filled his thoughts. As he stepped into the cold air outside, everything felt different now, as if the world had shifted half an inch and finally aligned with who he really was. Teachers had waited for him in the lobby, thanking him with trembling hands. Parents he barely knew hugged him tight. Even the evaluator, once so dismissive, offered a quiet, humbled nod that carried more apology than words could manage. Back home, Tyler lingered at his side, as though afraid he might vanish if he blinked. "Dad," he whispered, "are you scared to go back to school after all this?" Cole smiled, brushing soot from his son's cheek that somehow still lingered. "Not scared. Just ready." It surprised him to realize how true that felt. The next morning, the superintendent called to check on him. She spoke gently, respectfully, 2 words he'd rarely associated with his job. The district board wanted to meet as soon as he felt well enough. They weren't offering sympathy. They were offering trust. A real role, real change, real purpose. And when Cole returned to the school 2 days later, the shift was unmistakable. Students held up handmade posters thanking him. Teachers stopped him in the hall with tears in their eyes. The evaluator waited outside the office and shook Cole's hand with both of his voice low and sincere, as he admitted he'd been wrong in ways that went far beyond paperwork. Cole didn't need the apology, but accepting it felt like setting down weight he'd carried too long. By the time the district board convened, the decision was unanimous before discussion even began. They wanted him to lead a new safety and emergency division, one he would build from the ground up. Cole sat quietly as they listed the responsibilities: training faculty, modernizing equipment, identifying hazards before they turned dangerous. For the first time in years, the work ahead didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a return to something he'd loved, reshaped into something he could finally live with. After the meeting, the superintendent walked him out to the parking lot. Snow fell softly around them. "You know," she said, "most people go their whole life waiting to find the moment that tells them who they really are. You didn't just find yours, you acted on it." Cole replied with a quiet nod. He wasn't used to hearing praise that felt earned. Weeks passed. The science wing was rebuilt. New protocols were implemented. Cole moved into a small office overlooking the courtyard, its desk bare, except for a framed photo of him and Tyler at a lake they used to visit. Teachers stopped by often not for repairs, but for guidance. The evaluator volunteered to be the first to complete Cole's new safety training course, joking that he could use a lesson in listening. Cole didn't disagree. Tyler noticed the change, too. His dad stood a little taller, now laughed more freely. And when he walked through the school, people greeted him by name, not as the man who fixed heating vents, but as someone who'd changed the very way the district thought about safety. A full year passed before the day that truly marked the turning point. The school held a ceremony honoring employees who had shaped the district's future. Cole tried to sit in the back, but they called him forward near the end. Students cheered. Teachers clapped so loudly it echoed. The superintendent presented him with a plaque he hadn't expected, and words he would never forget: for courage in crisis, for integrity in service, and for protecting what matters most. Cole lifted the plaque only briefly, but Tyler, now almost as tall as his dad's shoulder, beamed with a pride that nearly knocked the breath from him. Afterward, as the gym emptied and the lights dimmed, Tyler tugged his sleeve. "Mom would have been proud," he said. Cole swallowed against the emotion rising in his chest. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe she's the reason I found my way back." They walked out together into the evening air, winter settling softly over the parking lot. Everything felt calmer now, not because life had become easy, but because it had become honest again. Cole had stopped hiding from the past. He'd stepped into the fire, literally, and come out carrying more than 2 students. He'd carried the truth about who he still was, and that truth had given him back his purpose, his dignity, and a future he could pass on to his son with steady hands. In the end, that's the quiet lesson buried inside stories like his. Sometimes life breaks us open, not to destroy us, but to let the part we've been burying finally breathe again.